This is part 2 to the operating system tier list part 1 from earlier this month. That's not an essential watch if you just want to see me complain about the things in this video. And that in turn is a legacy sequel to the ancient video of all my definitive opinions on various tech. So if you can watch 15-year-old me talk about vaguely similar things, you can if you want. When I first recorded this video, I said everything in such a way that it just assumed a lot of prerequisite knowledge of iOS 7. And in case, you might not necessarily have that for one reason or another, so I will just clarify up front. iOS 7 was the first iOS to switch from this visual design, where everything's 3D and skeuomorphic, to this design, which is the basis for what followed in the kind of following 10 years after it, with various tweaks and improvements. And what I firmly believe to be, as a result of this, basically every single other company under the sun also did a similar change in design of logos and product packaging and all that sort of thing. So that's the prerequisite knowledge that I didn't think to mention in the initial recording session for if you need it. Okay, strap in. So I'm going to talk about iOS 7. Okay. I never actually used iOS 7 for a prolonged period of time. I stubbornly refused to update beyond, off the top of my head, 6.1.2. Possibly. It doesn't matter. 6 is the point. For so long that by the time I finally caved, 8 had come out. So I went straight from 6 to 8, dodging brain rot 13 years in advance. So I've probably used iOS 7 as much as I've used, Windows 95, but it still gets a special place on this list because of what it did to the world. Sure, as I said, Windows 8 came out a year earlier and had the same issues, but everyone did and still does hate Windows 8, and I don't think the world would entirely change its appearance based on something that was unanimously hated upon arrival. So I don't blame the flat modern design of the subsequent years, and even to an extent still to this day, on Windows 8. I blame it squarely on iOS 7, and I don't think that's unreasonable. So as I alluded to, I never really used it outside of occasionally borrowing my... Oh, I've got this one as well. This is the 4S, isn't it? I think. One of them was a... Did they have a 5 after this, and that one was a work phone that he had to give back, or something? Although I thought this was a work phone. Maybe by the time he got it changed, they just didn't want it back because it was old. Anyway, so I've never really used it extensively outside of borrowing my dad's phone occasionally at the time for, putting music on the stereo or as a secondary camera if my iPad was charging or whatever. But I remember very clearly that some of the school iPads that we had, this was, I feel like in present day everyone gets their own Chromebook or whatever. We had just kind of a fleet of laptops, Windows 7 laptops, and iPads that they weren't assigned to anyone specifically. It'd just be like, oh, we need to do research for this thing. That group of people can use the iPads. That group of people can use the laptops. Or we're going to type this thing up so we can print it out and put it on a display. So that kind of thing. We'd all just grab one and do whatever with a network account. So the point is that some of those were updated quicker than others. Some of the iPads stayed on iOS 6 while others were updated to iOS 7. There was a lot of overlap. They were very inconsistently updated. And I remember very clearly, and I was in year 3, and for people who don't know the British school system, that is age, 7, 8, I think. I remember very clearly trying to kind of rally support from some of my peers in school of this looks so much worse than that, doesn't it? I'm not the only one going insane here, because I remember my dad didn't mind it, and everyone else in my family didn't really have a horse in the race at this point. So I was just like, I'm not going insane, right? This looks way worse, right? And some other people would just be like, it looks the same. And I remember just being like, what do you mean it looks the same? How can you possibly say it looks the same? Who could possibly believe that? I'm like, even if you don't care about the difference, you must at least concede there is a difference, right? I know we're 7 or whatever, but you have eyes. It's like, even if you don't care about high definition over standard definition, you have to at least concede there is a difference, even if you don't personally care about it. This is... I'm trying to go on a tangent about 4K, but personally I just feel like 4K is just a waste of time in almost all situations, because it's does this even look different? Even side by side, maybe a little bit, but generally, is there a difference? Unless they're side by side and possibly slightly zoomed in, how everyone wants to watch films. Fair enough, I guess, if you want to shoot in 4K and then edit in 1080p to give you a little bit of cropping, I can appreciate that, but still, also bitrate matters more than resolution, but whatever. Versus the difference between 576i and 1080p, or even 720p, is even if you are the kind of person who's like, I don't really care, I just watch standard definition, I don't mind DVDs, or, like, broadcast TV. It's like, yeah, it's perfectly valid to not care, but you must at least concede that, yeah, that looks sharper. It's like, even if you don't care, that you surely you can see there's a difference. I'm arguing with 8-year-olds from 15 years ago. What is wrong with me? Wasn't quite 15 years ago, I hope. I've not done the maths. I'm not going to either. It's all completely beside the point. iOS 7 gets the lowest ranked iOS slots, not because of my personal experience using it necessarily, but because of what it did to the world. Right. I remember very clearly in this era, iOS 7 had been out for a little bit, not a massive amount of time, and I already hated it, obviously.
But I mean, seriously, iBooks. As an example, first, why on earth would you want a book off a bookshelf that looks like that? And I mean, seriously. Whereas, if you get the iOS 6 device, this one being Grandma's iPad mini, software iOS 6.1.2, the menu, in fact. Out of that and that, you'd definitely go for that, wouldn't you? I mean, it just looks more nice. That's just horrible. The cartoony flatness of it. But look, they're like little actual like paperweights or something. You can see that they look 3D. And that's just boring. All Apple apps nowadays need iOS 7 and it's so annoying.
And I was in Tesco with my mother, and we were stood at the end of the cereal bars and other such snacks aisle, and I remember looking at the shelf, and there was some go-ahead bars like this, and I'd noticed some of them still had the old style packaging, but some of them had been replaced with new ones with this type of packaging. And I just remember standing there in Tesco in 2013 and just feeling this pit in my stomach. I just thought, oh no, this isn't good. Please don't tell me everything is going to start looking like iOS 7. Please tell me that's not gonna happen. Sorry, I forgot just how bad this is until I was looking up the pictures for editing. This is, even by flat design standards, this is atrocious. It looks like it was designed in PowerPoint in about 5 minutes. As I said, everyone hated Windows 8. Nothing happened straight after Windows 8 came out, or like the Zune, which is admittedly quite a flat UI. This isn't particularly skeuomorphic. I mean, you know, the cultural impact of the Zune is such that a solid portion of you have probably never even heard of this before. But, so whatever. But the point is, while iOS 7 wasn't technically the first thing to try this, I'd firmly stand by that it was the first thing to try it and have it actually be a change to a widely used enough thing for the public to be exposed to it enough, for them to become used to it enough, for other companies to notice and think, let's do that. Apple are cool and hip and such. Down with the kids. Let's do that. I think technically it was actually Pepsi, I think I read, that were the first to try a kind of flat design in 2008. Truly the worst thing to happen that year. But it was only this hateful scourge on the world that led to all of everything else turning flat, and I stand by that. Well, in recent years, Pepsi they've done beyond a 180. This is like 80s vibes somehow. And before anyone starts with, move on, let go of the past, keep moving forward. Before anyone's, don't meet the Robinsons, me, alright? There is nothing about Fruta-Guerrero and skeuomorphism and that which is fundamentally linked to the past. There is nothing that is preventing anyone in the modern age from just going back to it. This isn't like saying, I miss the world before smartphones and that. Pretty much, I mean, technically speaking, it would be physically possible, but for all intents and purposes, impossible to uninvent the smartphone. There is nothing stopping companies from just changing their packaging back to how it used to look 20 years ago. There is nothing about this that is fundamentally tied to the past. I remember the first time I ever saw the iOS 7 UI, I was in Sainsbury's this time. I don't know why I was in Sainsbury's. I was standing by the magazines and I was looking at some of the covers of the tech magazines, and I saw it and thought, it's not real, is it? That looks terrible. Please tell me that's not real. Please don't let this be what it's actually going to look like. But yeah, it was. I was just filled with dread and sincerely hoped it was just a baseless rumour that this magazine was reporting on, but no. sadly, alas. Now, I tend not to swear on this channel, not because I'm a prude, I don't care, but because of two factors mainly. Number one, because I like making content that you could watch with your grandmother if you wanted to. I don't really know why, I've just always thought that. But two, and more importantly, swearing is just so much more impactful, or so much funnier if it's used sparingly. Like, if you drop in an F-bomb every third word, it just loses all impact. It's like, what, it's extra words, why are you bothering? I say this to highlight the fact that I say this without the slightest, with nary a whiff of exaggeration. I fucking despise what iOS 7 did, has done, and in many ways continues to this day to still do to the world. 7 came out and all of this other stuff started changing as a result, like right at the start of the era where I was becoming slightly more aware of stuff in the world, and already missing the prior years. I know being nostalgic for like 2011 in 2013 feels like being nostalgic for a Tuesday on a Thursday, but like, I was. It was just, I suppose it was the start of, like, the enshittification of everything had truly started at that point. I mean, I know that's always been a thing. My grandparents had a tablecloth that was from, like, the late 1880s or something that was passed down, and you can spill literally any beetroot, red wine, tomato, anything, like, everything and anything has been spilled on that thing, and it always washes out completely fine. So I know to a point enshittification has always been a thing, but it really ramped up in kind of the 2010s, and that was starting to happen at this point. Everything just started being diluted down to the cheapest version of itself, in a way, if you know what I mean. Like, I started playing Heyday a bit in 2013, like I mentioned before, after my grandparents had a conversation about it with another, like, grandparent or parent in the school playground waiting to pick us all up at the end of the day once. Pointless backstory, but true.
So irrelevant.
And it looked fine in terms of, like, graphics. I, like, helpfully have these period-correct screenshots to demonstrate that I'm not just going insane here. But then at some point in, like, 2015, the quality of the textures just, like, plummeted for no perceivable reason. This ran perfectly fine before. It's exactly the same graphically as it ever was. It's not like they've added ray tracing. Why? Like, everything's a bit blurry, and any like decoration with an animation on it just looks terrible. Also, I swear, Apple Maps location accuracy just got worse for no reason. I'm not sure how to show this without doxing myself, but I'm sure when I first started using iOS in like 2012, 2013, the current location pointer on maps was fairly accurate, with the like, or at least somewhere in this area, circle around the main point being quite small. But again, by like 2015, the dot was always quite far off, and the circle was always massive. Like, I don't know, somewhere in this postcode. How have you got less confidence at knowing where I am? This is the same device. Like, I get that it's older, but, like, just surely it being a bit old doesn't impact how accurate the GPS is, or at least the, like, IP-based location. Am I missing something here? So just little, like, comparatively minor things like that just felt like contributing to a sense of everything's a bit shit now that I felt throughout kind of 2013 and then mostly in like 2015-16. It was always minor things like...
On topic for this channel, SpongeBob moves in, going from big seasonal events with a ton of limited time stuff to smaller ones with only a handful of it to basically just none after that.
Nickelodeon rebranding to something slightly different and a bit more obnoxious than it was before.
Coming up next, it's SpongeBob Truth or Square on Nicktoons.
Gross, man! Was that you?
Do I need deodorant?
Or classic, the wine aisle in Morrison's, which had its, like, cellar... I hope I can find pictures of this. The cellar-style wooden flooring and walls that they put in the wine aisles, because it was cool. It was like, oh, the wine aisle, it's like a cellar. That's a nice kind of vibe. I was just torn out, just to make it look like every other aisle. For no reason. They probably spent, like, £1,000 or something, and hiring a bunch of people to go in and just tear out the vibe and make it as cold and boring as the rest of the place. Why? That doesn't even make financial sense. You've just wasted money to make the place worse. And even, I could feel like surely, you could potentially even argue maybe that vibe could make someone kind of wonder upon it and think, oh, this kind of cellar vibe has got me feeling like some wine. You can at the very least, like, that's unlikely, I feel, but there's at least more than you can say for the benefits of it looking like every other aisle. Nothing about that has any chance of making someone think, I wasn't feeling wine, but I'm feeling wine now. Whereas that at least had that minuscule little thing, and if all you're thinking is for the person to see wine and think they want it, then they both serve exactly the same purpose. Why did they do this?
I think by the time that I saw this was happening, my initial reaction, I was so ground down by everything going this way that my internal reaction was basically, yeah, of course that's happening. Because everything has to be a bit worse for some reason. That's just a universal truth, apparently.
A bit after recording this, I was in Yorkshire in a little shop, and they had a whole upstairs section that was for alcohol, and this had the kind of vibe, this sort of thing. The wine aisle, it used to just be standard that supermarket wine aisles would have this kind of vibe. Sorry for how poorly recorded this footage is. You get the point. Sky TV Interactive Services. This is incredibly niche. Just drying up and finally dying an unceremonious death. You people with less weird niche interests. You people who are really into trains, you don't know how good you have it, I'm telling you. Mine literally, for the most part, doesn't exist anymore. I'm sure there were diminishing returns. First of all, they didn't really market it very well. You never heard them talking about, you can use these interactive features, apart from very rarely and mainly just earlier. And sure, it was just kind of a glorified shop. But it was still kind of an extra. They still put work into it. It was still something, and my childhood self was really fascinated by it and how the back end of it worked, and contributed an absurd amount to my modern day interest in media and tech and how them working together and stuff like that. And it just felt like on the Sky's part and everyone else just kind of felt like, yeah, I can't be bothered anymore. Cut everything we can. You just get the TV, just the linear TV itself, the bare minimum we can give you. Oh, and also, we're gonna start cutting off end credits or slightly speeding up shows so we can fit in more ads. I know that wasn't them personally, but that was like the other networks. But still, all of this was happening at the same time. All of them on their own are just like, oh, that's a shame. But all of them happening at once, a death by 1,000 cuts type thing. It's just like, why is all of this happening? Why is everything just getting a little bit more shit for no reason all at once?
I appreciate this is extreme first world problems, obviously. I'm not claiming this is the biggest problem in the world. The fact that I'm talking about this on its own for however long this video is kind of makes it seem a bit like this is I genuinely consider this the biggest issue in the world. I don't. It just really bothers me because of how avoidable so much of it was. But in many cases, just leaving the thing exactly how it was. It was more effort to make it worse in a lot of these cases. But you're fun at parties? No, I don't go. And you're watching a video called Operating System Tier List, so don't pretend you do either. I should also clarify, not everything in 2012, 13, 15 and 16 was terrible. There's plenty of good stuff in there. Just the overall vibe was just not as good as the years prior.
Obviously, even in 2014, many elements were still not as good as the 2000s. But, if we must obsess over a 2010 for some reason, honestly, I'm not sure there's 2010 I'd rank lower than 2016 now I'm thinking about it. So what ranked a bit like 19, 17, 11, 10, 14, 12, 13, 18, 16, 15? I don't know. It's really difficult. It depends on what kind of vibe you're after. They all have different qualities. Some have great vibes in some areas and abysmal vibes in others. There's a strong case to be made for none of them being better than any of the 2000s, but yeah.
And it's also, I've put a weird amount of thought into this. It's really difficult to try and rate years as a whole because they can contain... I don't really get that much nostalgia. What I more get is just every kind of era, and they don't have consistent lengths, just has kind of a gut feeling vibe to it. I don't know if that's normal. I don't know if I'm just weird. And I can't even explain what each one feels like, but some of them are just more... I don't know. I just like... Some of them are better than others. But it's really difficult to judge years as a whole because the vibe of a lot of 2015 was worse, but then there's a chunk of a bit of time in the summer where it's like, this is actually really good. So the point is, a lot happens within a year, and different parts of one year can have vastly different vibes.
I will admit there were even some occasions where I'd look at my iOS 8 or 9 riddled iPad mini with its mostly default icon layout, because that's how I am, with still clinging to my Bubbles wallpaper, and think, okay, I'm going to try and enjoy this. Clean, fresh, maybe, arguably, let's try and enjoy it. But even then, I couldn't get over how horrible it looked, and also the way it felt like it was broken. iCloud photos, FaceTime, etc. At least we have USB-C, that's a positive of the modern day. The amount of things that still ship with micro USB, it's just embarrassing. I know that it's just because it'll be either old stock or they've only got they've got a bunch of old connectors they don't just want to chuck out. But like, power banks, and I feel like, to be fair, most of the things I've had this with are just kind of like things you just put somewhere and they light up or whatever, and in that case it's arguably kind of a benefit because it means I can use up some of the million micro USB cables that I've got on just something that's just going to stay there and I don't have to think about it. But in principle it is just like, oh, come on guys. It's like, why do they still make things with rubberized plastic on them that they just turn back into oil after not even that much time? We don't. This isn't even just we didn't realise it was going to happen. They've been doing this for long enough now that it always ends up happening. Why don't we just stop doing it? And that's not to say that the USB-C spec is not a hot mess, because in a lot of ways it absolutely is. But at least it's slightly better than every device you have having a weird proprietary end. I remember seeing a video about Lightning versus USB-C back in the day. I believe I commented this on it. This is probably still out there. Where they eventually ended up saying, yeah, USB-C is better, but the spec's confusing, so you're probably better off just only ever using the USB-C cable that came with the thing. And I just thought, so by that logic, Lightning's better then, because at least all of the Apple products that use Lightning can basically you can use the cables interchangeably. And I just thought, like, that. First of all, that's a bit overkill. You don't need to only use the cable that came with something. As long as you're getting decent quality cables, you'll probably be alright for the majority of things. But also, I just thought, if the spec is in such a state that that's the situation, it really is quite depressing.
Also, to be fair, the physical connector of Lightning is arguably kind of actually better than USB-C. It's just a shame that it's, proprietary and only ever USB 2 and Apple licensing fees, blah, etc. Because Lightning puts strain on the cable, USB-C puts strain on the hole that you plug it into, and it's obviously better to put the strain on the cable. I think that's the thing. Even if I do have a weird, like, Pavlovian reaction to it, whenever I have to use Lightning, there was an era in, like, 2018-19 where we had multiple Lightning cables that looked fine, but were obviously damaged internally and would just disconnect constantly if I was using them for data. So I think, for some reason, as a result of that, I always feel like whenever I plug in Lightning that it's going to be really temperamental and it's probably going to disconnect halfway through whatever I'm doing. But that's just me.
It's just me.
And, I'm not completely blind. I'm aware of the, medical developments, things like that. Progress in social issues, equality. Those are things that generally have had a largely upwards trajectory and have generally improved over the last 20 years. So I'm not completely blind to this, and I'm sorry if it seems like I'm overlooking serious issues in the name of the fact that I like iPods. I just wanted to say that I'm not completely blind to that.
What was the original point?
I mean, I can appreciate in the Sky Interactive Services one, it might have been costing them more to keep the services running over satellite and like phone cables, and then they were actually gaining from additional sales because of it. And by this point, everything was going more online anyway. So that one example, as much as it pains me to say it because of how interesting I found them, I can understand why they cut it. But the other stuff, the rebranding of Nickelodeon to something more obnoxious, the cutting out of the wine aisle, the speeding up... Okay, that one maybe is to make more money, kind of. But, like, some of them are just like, there was no reason to do this. Why did you do this? What was the point? Everything just feels cheap and half-assed. Bugger all DVD bonus features for you. Look at how much stuff you got on the Cars DVD, and look at how much stuff you got on the Cars 2 DVD. I know you can still get 2-disc special editions, but even on the 1-disc edition, you used to get a bunch of extra shit. That Cars thing is because I also recorded my Cars Theory video earlier, so it's on my... That was the example that came to mind.
Another minor one that really bothered me was hotel TVs stopped having custom interfaces and started just having the regular like stock TV listings that came with that TV, which again I'm sure was a cost-cutting thing. I remember in 2012, this was a super early one even. I remember in 2012 being in a Holiday Inn that still had one, and it was like, wow, this still has one. That you never get that. So even at this point, I remember specifically feeling like this doesn't, even now the vibe of this doesn't quite fit the vibe of like last year at this point. Really weird. There's some ways that 2012, 13, I think about them and they feel like, oh yeah, that's the later years.
It's a weird old thing. But now I'm thinking about it, this was also kind of the start of the everything's a reboot and remake era of media. So in some ways, everyone was completely obsessed with the past, but just a bit further back in the past most of the time. And also, generally, they never recaptured the past very well, so even the attempts to acknowledge the past still didn't work very well. And I don't know, just like, this is so stupid, because making stuff is easier than it's ever been. But for some reason, that I feel like that devalues it in a way. And I know that I'm not filming this on tape. But like, you know that Tom Scott video where they do like a Top Gear challenge to get in the background of as many news broadcasts as possible? They had to do that with like a few people in a room with a couple of TVs and a bunch of DVD recorders.
You know how we recorded TV? Onto DVD. I had a DVD recorder.
He had one of the really early hard disk DVRs.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and it was a complete nightmare to pull the footage off. I can't remember whether we actually had to disassemble the hard disk or whether it was just a lot of USB cables and things. But I think we might have had yours there as well, because we had a whole
show off it.
And it's like, that's so cool! I don't know. Nowadays, you could just rip it off iPlayer later, but there's something about that process that's just like, that makes this feel like such a thing that a lot of passion and work went into. And not that passion and work doesn't go into stuff made more recently. Like, of course it does. In fact, arguably more, because less time had to be spent on figuring out technical limitations that could go into other stuff. But I don't know, man. Seeing glimpses of all the shows that I'd watched when I was younger, and didn't even watch anymore, but would still occasionally like see on in like a neighbour's house who had young children, whatever, Bob the Builder type thing, you know, going from wholesome stop motion to just cheap-looking CGI, and like I know that's another cost-cutting thing, but like stop, like I know there's not even, and some of this stuff I feel isn't even nostalgia. Like the Nickelodeon thing, nostalgia, fair enough, but like I feel like 2010s era children's TV show budget animate CGI is objectively less charming and nice to look at than stop motion, right? Surely that isn't just nostalgia. Even if you are a little bit younger than I am and are nostalgic for those versions, I feel like surely, generally speaking, you can say like Wallace and Gromit looks nicer than Bob the Builder again. CGI Bob the Builder. I can't think of any other kids shows. Here's an example. Even just within CGI, the animation of Jimmy Neutron looks kind of bad because it's old. The animation of Planet Sheen looks bad because it's cheap. And in my personal opinion, old looks better than cheap. Neither of which shows I actually watched. So, you know, nostalgia, maybe not. And like, I'm not blinded by nostalgia completely. Like Flash Player, for example. Adobe Flash is terrible, right? Let's be honest here. HTML5 is a million times better. The stuff made in Adobe Flash is great, but like the standard itself, it was an insecure, bloated, horrible mess, incompatible with a bunch of mobile platforms, and it was terrible. So, you know, I'm not completely blinded by nostalgia all the time.
I should clarify, I'm not pinning the blame for all of this on iOS 7. It's just that change happened at the same time as all of this other stuff. Although flat design is probably cheaper to make than 3D skeuomorphism, with all of the light physics and 3D rendering and such. And easier to not mess up, so less work. I mean, obviously any flat design is messed up, but you know what I mean. One that doesn't look like one that looks at least cohesive. So maybe there was some inspiration taken.
In terms of that kind of design is cheaper and lower effort. Maybe we should be cheaper and lower effort in other areas. That's just, I have no evidence at all that like companies actually thought that. That's completely baseless, but you know, technically possible.
I don't know.
Highly unlikely, but possible.
I don't know why it never occurred to me to look up who actually is responsible for this, but I was watching Jonathan, what's his channel? Thinking Different, is that his new channel? The guy who used to host Mac Address. Yeah, Thinking Different. He was talking about this a little bit ago. Yes, Johnny Ive. This man is single-handedly responsible for ruining society. I am exaggerating a bit.
My nemesis, some bastard who's presumably responsible.
I'm putting you on my list of enemies. There. You're in for it now.
I know nobody will, but don't send Johnny Ive any hate mail or anything. He's gone. He's not in Apple anymore, as you can tell from the existence of Liquid Glass. That's all that needed to happen. We don't need to go and witch hunt him or anything. And, you know, I know that iOS skeuomorphism. Is it skeuomorphism or is it skeuomorphism? I've been saying skeuomorphism, so I apologise if it is actually skeuomorphism and I'm just really irritating people. I'm just really irritating you by saying it wrong. But I know that only existed on iOS for a surprisingly short amount of time. So if the first iPhone came out in 2007, right? So that's 6 years. Which, I mean, obviously desktop UIs were like that beforehand, but it was still massively impactful. And I mean, everything else was also like that. And also, 6 years used to actually mean something back then. Like, the amount of time between 2016 and now is the same amount of time, apparently, as there is between 2016 and 2006. I refuse to believe that is the same amount of time. This was back when time ran at the correct speed, not the post-2020 bullshit we've been dealing with recently. But that's all besides the point. Why is time simultaneous? This isn't even just an aging thing. I think it seems like time has become faster for everyone. This seems to transcend generations. I mean, I don't know, I get the vibe that people were kind of aware of the passage of time, and then they just kind of paused in like 2003. People talk about years past decades from the perspective of it being perpetually about 2003. And I don't know what's caused that, but that's probably not even what it is. You get people gatekeeping 2000s nostalgia and aesthetics, and it's like, guys, the enshittification of things is so bleak that I'm not bloody surprised that people who never experienced the 2000s or early 2010s are looking at stuff from then and thinking, wow, that looks so much cooler than this. There's probably some people who would try and gatekeep these aesthetics even from me, like, oh, you're an 05, don't act like you actually remember anything from that decade or whatever, and you know what? Sure. I do have some memories back to 2008, and possibly 7, depending on how long Sky used this Press Red Now loop on channel 999. Don't worry about that. And some amount of home video and photos from then, which can, prompt more memories. Like that one of me watching trailers on the family laptop, I remember. I even specifically remember that thumbnail being on the side a lot, although in that case I did already remember that before seeing the photo again more recently, so it's not the best example of what I'm saying. But the point is, sure, I don't remember it anywhere near as well as subsequent years, and I wasn't anywhere near old enough to, engage with the culture fully, but just retroactively looking back at tech from that era, even stuff I wasn't aware of at the time, let alone had, and it's like, this is also creative and cool and exciting and innovative. We've just plateaued, and anything new that is coming out is just, some form of AI slop, as the saying goes. I'm not interested in basically any media, like media tech is the area that I'm most interested in, but I'm not interested in basically any media tech that's been released in the last 10 years. My uni edit suites are all running current modern Adobe and Avid, and it's like, I hate this so much. Not even because of the software itself. I mean, Adobe needs no explanation, and Avid feels like the free editing software you get on a CD with a camcorder from 2006.
And not in a good way.
It feels like they just got it compiling and said, ship it! Where it somehow takes an entire minute just to fully open, even on a top-spec M3 Mac Studio. But just the licensing and the constant online DRM and accounts, and fuck you if you have that suspected OCD anxiety thing about everything working offline, and fuck you if you give a shit about preserving older versions of this software. Always the newest thing. If you need an older version for an older machine which still works fine but is outside of what we can be asked to offer you, and you didn't already have downloaded, and you need and can only come from us, cannot be resold secondhand because we made everything permanently connected to our stupid servers, fuck you. Buy a new machine, your older one is crap, throw it out, and then people accept it. Uni lecturers saying, yeah, the machines in here are crap when they're like 2019 full-spec iMacs, probably more powerful and expensive than most of what the general population's ever even touched. People online saying, yeah, you can't fix that, you need a new machine, that one's useless now. So much needless e-waste! And I know I've said this before, but not even just reluctantly accepting it. Not even just, oh, I guess this is how it is and there's nothing we can really do about it. Shame. Boldly being like, yes, this is the best way this could be. I'm going to defend this to my grave. I don't know. Bloody hell! Also pay us more and more money a month because you all just keep paying it, so we might as well turn up the heat on these boiling frogs. Put another unskippable ad on your paid streaming service. Line must always fucking go up. All in the name of making us more money and wringing out every last dime from you. We've kicked down the door of the creative free space where you can express yourself and make stuff and not think about money for once, and found a way to wring money out of it endlessly for half-baked, unfinished trashware that you all keep using because the industry standard. Well, the fucking industry needs to do something about it then. Damn it, Apple, why did you have to screw up Final Cut so much? We could have still been using that. Why did I have to miss that? Actually, the industry kicked off and fully changed its entire workflow over that. Why, when they could have just stayed using Final Cut 7, because it was working perfectly fine before until Final Cut was improved again. But for some reason, everyone's so brainwashed into like, no, must always be new thing, we can't use a slightly old thing. The industry kicked off over and fully changed its workflow over that. Why the hell won't they over this? Especially since they're also obsessed with money, and this is mostly about money. Even Tim Apple is going subscription now. I bought this shit in 2019 and it has no DRM or anything, and it runs 1,000,000 times better than any Adobe or Avid software I've ever used, and yet still, I'd probably be mocked for saying I'm a Final Cut user if I was to actually speak to anyone on my stupid uni course I regret with all my being. What the hell kind of name is Pro Tools? What Tools? What moron named this software? You feel like a criminal using your own software while they install 100 different programs scattered about your start menu for no reason other than spying on you and preventing piracy, which doesn't even work, because as far as I'm aware, and I do actually mean that isn't just a joke, I actually haven't pirated any modern Adobe software because you couldn't pay me to willingly use that shit. It's easy as heck to pirate anyway, and I'm willing to bet none of the pirates have to deal with this. And they're probably the only hope of any of this software staying preserved for future reference. Even beyond software, let's make everything as cheap as possible, and it only works when you sign into an account, so if you lose our servers, you're out of luck, and the thing itself will probably break before it has time to get anywhere near ever becoming retro. Any show with a smaller budget than bloody Severance looks like cheap tap because it's all shot in HD, but that just shows up the blemishes and the imperfections of the set and the props and everything.
Maybe it isn't that. Maybe it's that, like, unimpressive lighting and, like, focusing is just looks worse in high definition. There's something about relatively low-budget TV shot in high def that just feels like a cheap, pale imitation of older shows of the same bracket that were shot in standard definition. I don't know, that might just be me.
And it's all just so bloody depressing. Can you fucking blame people who've only ever known this for longing for an era where they didn't exist and only just missed out on before it, where none of this was like this? Can we just at least let them have this one little bit of comfort in enjoying 2000s nostalgia content or whatever without getting all high and mighty because they're like 7 years younger than you are?
The world you're looking for no longer exists. You missed it.
Also, the more you try and keep people away from appreciating this sort of thing, the less likely society as a whole is to, like, revert in whatever number of ways to being more akin to as it was then, you know? Shooting yourself in the foot a bit, potentially, even. Like hardcore Linux people claiming that everyone should use it because of how much better it is, but then when normies come in and ask for advice, they're like, no, you're clearly just too much of an idiot for this, go back to Windows, making it completely uninviting at all because you secretly actually really like how niche it is and how cool it makes you.
Why aren't you this passionately angry about, like, politics and more important stuff? You bet your bloody arse I am. This is just the only thing I'm this passionately angry about that I can talk about on the internet without fear of, shadow banning or whatever. Plus, I'd just be reiterating obvious facts everyone's already said anyway. And also, I've always kind of considered making these videos to be a bit of, providing escapism from the real world for anyone who for some reason enjoys watching them. And I know I've kind of broken that to a certain extent here with this whole rant, but it's at least lighter than actual life and death stuff, I suppose. And, while we're at it, where's that university email that I got that time? I vent about this very briefly in my final subpar uni film, but I need it out explicitly here. Please ensure that you bring a notepad and pen to your meeting and write down any feedback, comments, and any actions/objectives that are agreed. This is standard professional practice, should be the norm for all students. These notes should then be typed up into your production file to document your progress and remind you of what was discussed and agreed. That just flipped a switch in me, and I really wanted to send it, but I didn't. I just wrote it out and then deleted it. With all due respect, the world is being run by who will never face consequences for their crimes. The planet will probably become uninhabitable from climate change and or nuclear war before we reach retirement, and the entire film industry will probably be replaced by rampant, unregulated AI before we ever get a chance to work in it. So forgive me if I struggle to give a shit about some stupid arbitrary standard practice pointlessly restricting yourself to a less efficient note-taking method for no fucking reason whatsoever besides the fact that someone decided to make that up as a rule once. I know everyone has, nostalgia and is like, oh, back in my day, but surely, in a lot of ways, this is objectively worse. Like, there's so much stuff. And, you see people online say, why is everything a subscription now? I'm sick of this. And, like, on the one hand, yeah, the absurd increase in the number of things that are pointlessly subscription-based. So much software. Printers that charge you a subscription service even if you've got the ink and everything. That car that was charging a subscription service for heated seats. Everything at least somehow needing a stupid app with an account, which is both, give away some more of your data, and also at least somewhat reliant on some external server, which could go down at any point, or probably wouldn't work if you didn't have Wi-Fi for a prolonged period, or at all. To be fair, you don't have to do that. If you pay attention and do enough research, you can still not have to deal with subscriptions. The only monthly subscription that I have is YouTube Premium, which, and I'm giving money to Google, but at least I'm giving some amount of money to individual, people making things without having to subscribe to 100 different Patreons, although I'm also subscribed to a couple of Patreons as well. And, don't buy the printer that needs the subscription, don't buy the car that needs the heated seat subscription. things which are just moronic, and that there's no reason other than greed for them to want that, because the hardware, the functionality is already in there. Let's charge a little bit more if you're on such tiny margins that you apparently so desperately have to charge this. And if you're looking for a product, and a lot of them are the type that need an app and an account, maybe try and find another similar thing that could serve the same purpose but doesn't need that. So it is possible, and in terms of software, like, it's possible to avoid, depending on your personal use case and whether you could survive with an older version of something, and your personal kind of moral, ethical code of piracy. So it is possible to minimize subscriptions. And also, not buying that printer, not buying that car, not buying the subscription version of that software also doubles up as, voting with your wallet. If everyone does that, it's like, that's what you need. You need them to see, okay, all right, we've turned up the boiling water on these frogs this much, but they've actually started noticing now. But also, I'm not going to, act all high and mighty and say, oh, you idiot, you should have done this, you should have done this, you should have done this, because first of all, people are busy. You might not necessarily have the time to deal with all of that. All sorts like that. And also, you shouldn't have to deal with this. All of the moronic subscriptions for things that shouldn't be subscriptions should just not be there in the first place. You shouldn't have to wade between them and potentially choose a slightly less, ideal product for the sake of avoiding this. Throw another ad into your paid subscription service. Because clearly Netflix are absolutely on the ropes and about to run out of money at any moment, because it's not like they were about to buy Warner Brothers or whatever for billions of dollars. They're clearly not just doing this for pure greed. They're clearly not. Back in the day, and I'm not trying to be all high and mighty, because that's not going to achieve anything. There's no point in fighting when we're all the same here fundamentally. But back 7 or 8 years ago, when I've probably even mentioned it on this channel back then, Netflix has always pissed me off.
Well, let's be fair, I think back then I was mildly bothered by the fact everyone just assumes that you have it, or at least more so did back then when it was basically the only one.
Because I've basically never had it, for all intents and purposes, so all I'd ever hear about it was like, they've put the prices up again. But then I'd see that, and then no one would, everyone would complain and then just carry on paying it. And it's like, what are you, they're just going to keep doing it if you keep, And I don't mean to say, told you so, but, sorry, I'm not trying to judge anyone for paying for Netflix. I appreciate that, life's busy and it can be, sometimes it's worth paying a bit just to be able to chuck something on at the end of the day to unwind. I do appreciate that. But at the same time, the number of people who complain about it and then just keep paying it, just turning up the water on the boiling frogs. And the boiling frogs, in this case, all were aware that the boiling temperature was increasing, and yet we're still just sitting there. And I don't... Now we're at the point where there's so many ads even on the paid tier, and it's like, this... We didn't have to let it get this far, but... I don't know.
And this applies more to music than it does to video, but, especially for music. There's a certain amount of, I very strongly associate music and other media, but mostly music, to bits of time in my life. And so the music that I've collected over this, because I never went to streaming fully, I've always been adding to a collection of stuff that I actually have. And all of that stuff feels so personal to me that it's like, no way am I dumping all of that and relying on a company to just provide it all to me. Like, no. Get out. You're in my personal space.
And I know I'm paying for YouTube Premium, which also goes up now and then, but first of all, I've been on the student discount, so that's good. But also, again, at least that feels a bit like I'm actually paying individuals for, creative endeavours, whereas Netflix, I feel like I'm just... Like, how much of this is actually going to real people here? Is any of this really? Is this actually making a difference? Especially given the state of streaming residuals that caused an entire SAG-AFTRA strike a couple of years ago. If you really want to, you can still, own your own music. You don't even have to use an iPod. You could get a phone with either a phone to use as a dedicated music player, especially if you already have an old one with enough space, or a phone if you've got an SD card slot, or if you need a phone upgrade at some point, getting one with an SD card slot, you could put a bunch of extra storage in. That's what I do. I've got a 256 gig SD card in my phone with all my music on. You don't even have to go all out and buy a proper music player. I like iPods because, I don't know, early stage dank pods back in 2020 just flipped a switch in my brain and made me absolutely fascinated with them. iPods
don't really need to exist. I have this one, so I just leave it in here for the occasional time I play music in here. But even just in general practice, I like having my music synced to an iPod and to my phone, because like the main one that I use is Rockbox, because the amount of music I was trying to put on it, it also has 256 gig card on it, but it's just too much for iTunes to cope with it. It'd take like a week to import an album. Just into the library. Syncing was still fine, but whatever. And then some stuff would just break, even with the 5th gen with the extra RAM. Now it's Rockbox, drag and drop to both. It's great. I can even sync playlists if I set them up on my phone and then just Notepad++, find and replace the phone path to just the Rockbox path, put them on, and works great. Besides the point, I like having a dedicated music player with the same stuff on as my phone, because, if I'm in the car or whatever, or if I'm using my phone anyway, I can listen to the same music. But then if I'm in a social situation, like, I don't know, put some music on or having tea downstairs, I can take the dedicated iPod and just plug it into the speaker and just leave it there. You don't have to sacrifice someone's phone to be connected to the speaker, either with a wire, as I would do it. I really hate Bluetooth, or Bluetooth within a certain range, and you can't really take it away or do anything else that has sound because it'll interrupt the music and blah blah blah. And I just find that really irritating. But having an iPod, you can just put it there and leave it, and it's great. I don't care how reliable your Bluetooth headphones or speaker is, even if it works 95% of the time. The 5% of the time that the Bluetooth whatever doesn't work, it just makes me want to do a plus net.
Forget it. Bin your router, pack a sack, move to the woods, build a rudimentary toilet, and become a full-time off-grid spoon whittler.
Do I not get annoyed by tangling wires? Yes, but nowhere near as much as I get annoyed by Bluetooth headphones dying when I wanted to use them for a bit longer, or having to fight with Bluetooth that doesn't want to work. Cost-benefit analysis, so to speak. It's similar to like, why are phones so expensive now? And yeah, flagships and iPhone. Do you realise how cheap iPhones used to be? Like, I'm not saying 200 quid isn't a lot of money. That is a sizable chunk of money. But I didn't realise, I'd forgotten. I looked at the Apple website on the Wayback Machine or something the other week, and it was like iPhone 4S for yours for $299. It's like $299, but at the same time, you don't have to own. Like, I kind of don't understand why people buy. The vast majority of people. I know I'm not treading new ground here at all. I don't really understand why the majority of people buy the newest flagship iPhone or Samsung or whatever, and then just use it just for like social media. And I don't necessarily mean the majority of people do always buy that. I mean the majority of the people that do, which is still probably a surprising number of people with finance and trade-ins and things. I can get the argument for buying something expensive now and then using it for a long time, but I feel like that's not what a lot of people are doing. Like, you don't need why so much money for just something that a substantially cheaper or even just a slightly older phone of the same brand could do. It's still rocking Note 9, etc. And I know the Note 9 was $1,000 when it came out, but I bought it in 2021 for like 100 and something quid, because Android phones don't hold the value basically at all. To be totally fair, still never used TikTok. TikTok might be the most power-hungry thing in the world, and I try and install it on this phone and it'd just explode. But I'm willing to bet, probably not. And you may say, what else are you expecting people to use their phones for? Like, what, AAA gaming? And it's like, well, no. But, like, so then basically no one should be spending this much. So then they'd be incentivized to not make it cost as much. I don't know. Back in the day, it made sense. Every new iPhone release had some insane new feature up to a certain point. Bigger storage, Touch ID, slow-mo cameras, live photos, even if most of them that have ever been taken have probably been claimed by iCloud Photos, never to return from the cloud again. Flexibility. Those were the days. Do we not remember when the original X came out and was $1,000 and everyone clowned on it, but then also just relented and bought it anyway, and that has now just become the accepted norm for some reason? And I know that on the one hand, there was that whole controversy where Apple were purposefully slowing down old devices, which seems like, those people just trying to get you to buy a new one. But then they were actually only doing it to make your old one last longer. But then also they definitely should have been clear about that. Whereas now I feel like it's just like, and it's not to say that, current thing is always better, don't forget about the past was worse shtick isn't something that's always been a thing. Another super minor one of these, but it's still one that I noticed, is back in the day, this is so stupid, back in the day, late 2000s,
you'd go into a pub or whatever, and they'd have some sport on the TVs. I'm not a very social person, but that's I don't know, kind of a vibe to that, and there'd be, in the bottom left corner, there'd be a little outline of a pint glass to signify, yes, this pub has paid an extortionate amount to license this channel to be shown, in the pub to the customers. But then at some point, that just changed to just being like a little square in the corner, just a rectangle. And it's like, why? What? This is just a minor thing, but once again, there was no reason to make this really minor thing a tiny bit worse for no reason. Like, just why? Admittedly, some of the stuff that was annoying me was completely stupid stuff that wasn't actually like a worse. Like, my primary school started changing what year groups were in which rooms between years, which was just never something that had been done before. That wasn't a worse change, but me at the time was just like, great, more stuff's changing for no reason. And I didn't help myself, to be fair. There are some home videos from the early to mid-2010s where my only goal in recording them was a futile, doomed attempt to rekindle, as accurately as possible, a vibe of the prior year. Like, there's a video from the start of Easter 2015 where I'm desperately trying to make it as cheerful as it was at the start of the summer holidays in 2014, and even that one, like, less than a year gap is like, this is just so depressing. And part of that, I think, is probably just seasonal related. Like, it's very grey. That does impact me quite a bit. So I didn't help myself, but it still contributed to a fact of, like, the things feel worse for some reason. I'm gonna desperately cling to things that weren't even that long ago. I don't know. So some of this was just like, I'm sick of change, but probably just because most of the changes were just things getting worse. It just felt like a way things were now different for no reason, while it was being insisted that all of these changes were actually so much better. And we don't even think of or reference the past anymore. I don't know. It was just a lot of small things that all contributed to a great sense of societal downgradedness. I was like 10. I really don't know why this all weighed on me so much, but it did. So many of those minor things all happened at around the same time, and it just felt like everything was a bit worse for no reason. You could have just carried on doing exactly what you were doing before, and it would have both stayed better and cost you less in the millions that you probably spent on rebranding and everything. Like,
hello, can I redesign your logo? Yes, that'll be £100,000 for a squiggle. Wish I was a graphic designer.
Why don't Nokia just pull out the exact blueprints for the 3310 and the one that I had, the 1110, and just make those exact phones?
Just switch out the barrel plug for USB-C, and you can probably fit a higher capacity battery than back then, so it'd last even longer, and you're sorted.
They would sell so much. Instead, people who want that are stuck with these stupid, like, tacky-ass feature phones that are full of ads and stuff, and the battery probably isn't as good because of the colour screen. I'm sure that the 2000s nostalgia bubble is a bit of an echo chamber that doesn't really reach as far as it feels like it does from inside it, which I admit is where I am. If I speak to my parents and mention this kind of thing, their reaction is usually like, people are nostalgic for the 2000s. It's like, yes! How are you not aware of this? But, like, I do get it. They in particular are just not online very much, and even if they were, they wouldn't, like, their nostalgia content would be for, like, the 80s and 90s. But also, sometimes parents, it feels like people of your era and a bit older just kind of wished away these great years and, like, they were nothing and somehow view them as if they're basically just the same as now. And I don't know, that just annoys me a bit. Like, the fact that they basically perceive the 2000s as just, like, not even that different from now. It just feels like, you ungrateful sods. You were, like, more conscious and real person than I was in this era. Like, I know, financial crisis and all, but before that, at least.
I remember saying to them in 2016 or so, I'm really jealous of the fact that you were, more alive and conscious in the past of TV. Everything was so interactive, and their reaction was basically, it really wasn't. But you see, the thing is, to them, when I say the past, I'm talking about the 90s, but I was talking about, like, 10 years prior at that point. And also, it was more interactive than just linear. You had CFAX, at least. At that point, all we had was the husk of BBC Red Button. That was basically it for MHEG programs. Not that CFAX was an MHEG program. I know it was analog, obviously.
I'm just yapping now. What am I even on about? This isn't even a point. I don't even know what appreciating it from this perspective would even consist of. Like, this is the visceral gut feeling I get for some reason. Just like, take some more photos, please. Mundane stuff. That's a life lesson, by the way. Take photos of mundane stuff. It's a million times. Who gives a shit about your trip to Portugal? Take pictures of just like your everyday life every now and then. It changes without you even realising. And then in like 5 years, you'll look back and be like, oh wow, we used to do that. The house used to look like that. It is so much more interesting. Do that. Trust me. Thank you. Like documentation of the mundane in the 2000s or whatever. It feels absent or just very lacking. I mean, I realise that's definitely mainly due to the absence of constantly carrying a camera everywhere, but there is also definitely far more consciousness generally about archival and lost media and such nowadays, which was way smaller in the past. That's proven by how much lost media there is from like the 2000s. And I've always felt like this because I have an obscene amount of like home video and home photos from through the years that I've made very sure, even from the time of recording them, to be like, right, I need to make sure I don't lose this or delete it or whatever. And there's a massive uptick in the amount of material I have from kind of 2014 onwards as I realised how much I was longing for more documentation of the mundane of the years prior and wanted to prevent this happening for the present. Well, the then present, now past. Even if at the time it felt kind of worthless and like, this is just like run-of-the-mill, everything bare minimum, slightly more shit than it used to be. Why? I've documented this, but this is cheap nothing. I need more documentation of the previous years. Who cares? It's not bringing the past back. Now I can look at the 2010s and remember all of the stuff and have a absurdly good memory of all this junk. And sometimes I wonder if I would view like 2006 to 11 less highly if it was better documented and less of a kind of blurry half mystery based only on the memories of a young child.
Sounds like an Alan Partridge book or something.
But I don't think it would, because randomly in the middle of all the shit, as I've discussed, like 2014, 17, 19, 21 to 23, they all particularly stand out. And I think the much greater amount of footage and documentation I have of those years just makes me all the fonder of them. The 2021 to 2023 sixth form years, where I kid you not, we in the small friend group literally took at least one photo for, I do believe, every single day we were at sixth form, which I then compile into videos every term, and precisely 6 hour long epic at the end. And if that doesn't show you that a time being better documented doesn't lower its kind of ranking in my mind, then I don't know what does. Also, the 2000s nostalgia bubble can't be that small because companies are starting to get in on it now, unless that's just like people my age joining the workforce more as like social media managers and things for like Microsoft. And even Sky have done something. Beehive Bedlam, they brought back Beehive Bedlam, and if you know anything about Sky Interactive features, you know that is like, was the game, because I think that one was free and all the others you needed like a day pass for. When that happened, it was like, they're capable of talking about the past! I don't know, it just felt like for years they're like, no, this is better, all of this is better, don't think about the past, the past was shit, don't think about it, but whatever. Nostalgia cycle being nostalgia cycle is how it will always be, even if it now does feel a bit like, yeah, I told you all this at the time, were you not listening? I mean, no, because I wasn't saying anything, because I was 7, and even if I was saying anything, like, who would listen? But whatever, I'm just yapping, as I've said. And at least as a result of this, designs are heading back that way. Liquid glass, Windows 11, stuff is a little bit more 3D and glassy and bubbly. Yes.
People of my era are finally getting into positions of mild influence and kicking out whatever morons changed it all in the first place.
I will take what I can get. But I don't understand. Like, read the room, people who rebrand to flat design. Especially ones that have only converted to flat design more recently. How are you this out of touch? Rebrands are just... They're just never good. Why do you think I've never changed this stupid profile photo and the random assortment of memes in my YouTube channel banner? It's just exactly like that since I was 14. Possibly 13. When did I make this banner? It's all ancient. I know. I think I'm 12 in the main Aubrey Holmes photo. Rebrands are never good. And even the name. My name isn't Aubrey Holmes. It's a nickname that's not even really a nickname because it's just a different name that I made up in May 2017 for reasons that you needn't bore you with. As a combination of a reference to Sherlock Holmes and a random episode of Only Fools and Horses.
You never said your name was Aubrey. Nor would you if your name was Aubrey.
And I just, for some reason, subsequently repurposed it as an internet name, and it's just been that way ever since. And for some reason, using my actual name on things, it's probably something to do with the fact that I struggle to take myself seriously on the internet, and basically anyway. Writing my actual name on things makes me cringe so much. You notice I'm not even saying it now, because it for some reason makes me physically cringe. But for some reason, this name, that I feel like, no offence if your name is Aubrey, is more embarrassing than my real name. For some reason, that I'm completely fine with that. It's so bizarre. I don't know what's wrong with my brain. Although, ironically, I do then enjoy taking the non-serious stuff weirdly seriously, having very consistent brand synergy and business cards. Although, credit where it's due, Sky never fully committed to flat minimalism. They used to have logos with a lot of variance depending on what thing they were talking about in that particular promotional piece. They'd have a logo with a different colour scheme to it, and then in kind of the 2010s they started just using this one for basically everything, which was a bit of a downgrade from the variation before, but at least it's still 3D and shiny, and they basically skipped straight from that. Unless you count this one time it was rendered slightly differently for an animation of it moving around rather than just being static with the colours inside moving a little bit. I can't for the life of me remember what clip this was in, but it looks slightly different, and I swear it was only ever used in one video as far as I've ever seen, so it doesn't really count, and it's technically just the same logo anyway. It's probably just the light shining on it slightly differently. In kind of the very late 2010s, they switched to this, so they've basically gone straight from the old style straight into the kind of liquid glassy style, which is fair enough. I mean, I'd still prefer they went back to just what they had before, but with different variations. Or the slightly older version from the 2000s, where it's almost identical, but the top and bottom of the letters is slightly less curved. But I thought I should mention that, so as much as I half sarcastically exclaim, they're capable of acknowledging the past! Which, by the way, they also did in this history video once, very, very briefly. They showed a bit of Sky Active in it. I had the same reaction to that. Although this does also prove that they're just sitting on a bunch of high-quality captures of their interactive services while the entire rest of the world is stuck with standard definition VHS rips and DVD recorder rips. But not to worry, that, it's something. Since I'm bringing out things as I talk about them a bit. I'm not sure. Don't worry about it. I know I'm saying that these years were outliers in terms of still being pretty decent in the face of all of the other stuff, but, I was still harkening back in a lot of ways.
I like some holidays, and it reminds me of the good old days, not having to go to school every day and being around here in the sun a lot.
Don't worry about why I'm inserting a greenhouse guide rope stake thing into the ground underneath a recliner garden chair. Although, to be fair, even at the time I did see those years as being better than the neighbouring years. This whole thing isn't just this meme. Anyway, 2013 as well, just as all of the enshittification was ramping up, it was, I believe, the UK's wettest summer on record, which is saying something because it's the UK, but I remember that just irritating me so much at the time because it felt like even the weather just can't be asked to be decent anymore. It just can't be bothered to put in just a little bit of effort to be sunny a couple days. I think what made it worse as well, like in the case of the go ahead bar thing, it felt like literally nobody else was even noticing, let alone caring. It was just bewildering to me at the time how this wasn't also bothering people. I mean, as I said, I know I was like 7, so I know that it was just because I was surrounded by either people who were my own age, who were too young and carefree and not weird enough to be paying attention to this, or adults who weren't interested in brand designs and design languages and things. Like, that's not a normal thing to be particularly interested in. Most people, it's just I don't care what it looks like. The product does the job. So, given that my only exposure was to adults who weren't graphic designers, from my perspective, everyone I ever interacted with, all like 20 of those people, were blissfully unaware and not caring, or even noticing how everything was gradually getting a bit worse a little at a time. So from there, it obviously just felt like literally nobody was somehow noticing, which was just, as I say, totally baffling, and all the more frustrating because nobody was somehow relating to how I felt. So I just felt alone in it, and it even felt a bit like, guys, everything's getting worse.
Why does nobody listen to me?
Why are we doing that? We need to stop this before it takes over everything. That's just how it felt. Thankfully, though, it transpires that I wasn't, in fact, the only person who was noticing this, because of how many people online are appreciating Fruta Guerrero and stuff from that era, and just like, yes, call me the opening of the Spider-Man 2 end credits, because I am vindicated. I could have just said, call me Dashboard Confessional, that would have been a lot smoother. There is a very vocal online group of people who now also feel like this, to the point that the companies themselves are now finally realising, oh yeah, that's actually really, really shite, isn't it? We should stop doing that. We should go back to how it used to be. That's way better. God fucking told us that at the time. I don't like them never, I guess. Part of me does feel a little bit like, see, I told you so. But I mean, I didn't have contact to Apple. I was a 7-year-old. As were, presumably, the vast majority of all of the people who are now also, like, in the 2000s nostalgia bubble of realising how much better it used to look. Like, we were all, like, kids. We didn't have power. I have no power here, Jackie Weaver. I was kind of hoping and expecting that the second I became an adult, I would just, like, stop caring about design languages. I thought it was just, like, a weird thing that I only had, like, the brain capacity to focus on because I was a child. But it hasn't. It's still very much something that I pay attention to for some reason. With that said, stop putting your shit in 4x3. I'm sure this has only started happening fairly recently. I noticed the only I tried very hard to never have to consume ads in as many places as possible. So the only time I really notice this is at the cinema. But without fail, there is always at least 1 or 2 ads that think they're so smart and artsy because they've put their thing in 4x3 or like a little bit less than 16:9, and it's like you're not clever. You can't just slap it into 4x3 and that automatically make it artsy or nostalgic. If you're gonna put it in 4x3, you better not be presenting that in high definition. Put it in standard definition, and not just digital standard definition. Digital standard definition is just depressing. Like broadcast TV, it's like, oh, this looks horrible. And the screen sizes of today. Commit. Run it through Betacam or something. Give it that slightly yellowy effect, right? If you're gonna put your thing in 4x3, commit. Go all the way. Otherwise, it just looks like you're too cowardly to go all the way, and you're like, oh, I don't want to fully commit, or you just don't know what you're doing, and you think like, oh yeah, this is just exactly what everything looked like, without any consideration of the fact that video technology has improved so much that everything looks way clearer than it used to. So you either look like you don't know what you're doing, or that you just couldn't be bothered to go all the way. Stop putting shit in 4x3 for no reason. Thank you. And also, it really felt like this was mainly a kind of school thing, but it just kind of a media thing as well, generally. It felt like the perception was there was no real benefit to using any kind of technology. There was no potential educational value at all, and it was just like, use them very occasionally, and it felt as if we were just kind of being humoured and being like, yeah, you can use those a bit, as if the second some like electricity is required for something, it's just like, yep, no, there is no potential educational value in this. You just want to shut your brain off. Even if you do just want to shut your brain off, that is exactly perfectly equally valid to however you may want to do that, going home and watching whatever people of this type watched in like 2012, and B, this is pretty rich coming from the same type of people who all have subsequently ended up addicted to Facebook, falling for every single AI scam post they see, which and being interested in it, like even though I was interested in like how stuff worked, and the as we've seen, apparently a lot about how stuff was graphically designed, stuff like that. I've been the family tech support person for like 10 years at this point.
If you can't fix it, what hope is there for us?
It still felt like you were just constantly like, oh, kids these days only interested in this. It was like, it's not like I'm not. Oh, kids these days interested in technology. Yes, and is that a bad thing? Why is that? Clearly, it's not a bad thing because now you're giving them all Chromebooks. Like, clearly that was just lies. So you do believe there's some benefit, but apparently only benefit if you give them the most abysmal computing experience possible, which I get is a budgetary constraint, but in that case, just use bloody paper. I'm trying not to be a Luddite too much. I'm not going to be like, oh, writing on paper's better. No, it isn't. It takes longer. It's harder to read. Your hand really hurts. Writing on paper is terrible, but like, would I rather do that than use a Chromebook? Especially a school-issued one that's probably really low spec. I might do. And also, speaking of trying not to be a Luddite, I know I said before, I'm not one for like, I feel like we should just try and just abandon pointless generational arguments. But you bunch of overreactive sods, me being interested in looking at how the back end of Windows network shares work is not the downfall of education at the hands of technology. This is the downfall of this is what that problem actually looks like, not this. This is nothing. This is having an interest in something. I know that this, I'm not doing like, all the kids these days are all TikTok addicted and don't care about school. There's a lot of stupid stuff in school that doesn't matter. That is valid.
I know, for example, how an oxbow lake is formed. Who cares?
There's a lot of people who aren't TikTok addicted. But you see, like, 11-year-olds scrolling TikTok, and it's like, why? Why has this been allowed to happen? Surely we all know that this specific situation, at least, isn't good for anyone or anything, right? This, like, attention spans. This is not good for anything.
People say this proves objectively, quote, it is the phones. No, it objectively is not the phones. It is the use of the phones. When cars were invented, the number of car accidents rapidly increased. The response to that was not, the cars are the problem. The use is the problem. Being interested in how stuff works and wanting to be able to speak to people you know remotely is not the cause of the downfall of civilization. It always, coverage of this and people talking about this issue, they seem so hostile towards the youths in question when they're the ones who are like the target. This isn't their fault.
Why am I suddenly the bad guy?
This is the platform's fault for being the way that they are, specifically to cause this. And so many of them, as was I, as was basically everyone that I know at the time, perfectly capable of just thinking, no, I will use this responsibly and smartly, but that's not a slight against the people who do end up getting hooked into it, because it's specifically designed to be that. This should just be such a non-issue, but because of Zuckerberg, it is. So, because entirely of the purpose-built addictive nature of this sort of thing, you then end up with everyone within the same bracket, like, tarred with the same brush of like, oh, these bloody kids these days. Like, just shut off. And then the solution is apparently to just talk about them all like they're borderline creatures that can't be reasoned with no, like, autonomy or brain.
No capacity for logical thought.
And who can't hear. And be like, no, we just need more control instead of going after the actual problem here.
How come I'm the villain?
And then, because then you end up with some people like me with what I would genuinely consider, even in retrospect, too many restrictions, like the inability to even watch YouTube without figuring out workarounds, and then other people with just none at all, who then are just exposed to, like, gore when they're, like, 7 or something. This is all just a mess. But then, arguably, I learned stuff figuring out those workarounds. So was it beneficial? Maybe. It was still a pain in the arse. And all in service of sincerely not doing anything nefarious. It's a bit of a... yeah, it's a mess. I don't know. I don't have a simple solution. And, you know, people call Gen Alpha trends stupid and meaningless, as if people in our generation weren't laughing at stupid nonsense back in the day. I mean, to be fair, I wasn't. I wouldn't be a hypocrite at all to complain, but I still don't, because I know how irritating it is when people who are just unaware of the joke are just like, oh, that stupid thing. It's just like, just let me have a laugh. Just sod off. Just chat with them, learn a little bit about what it is and why they like it, instead of just yelling and pearl clutching because you don't know what it is and you don't understand it. Like, take 5 minutes to just be like, oh, hello, son. Tell me about this thing that you're into. And they'd be like, oh, okay, interesting, cool. Your teenage children are, like, functional humans who can, like, talk to you, you know? Huh?
It's kind of like when YouTube slaps the made-for-kids tag onto, like, adult animated shows or whatever, and then they inevitably show up on YouTube Kids, and then some parent who wasn't paying attention kicks off because their child ended up seeing it, and then they'll blame everyone apart from YouTube and just be like, oh, this thing's clearly villainous. This thing needs to be stopped. I don't know what this thing is and I don't understand it, and I'm just gonna shout about it instead of just doing like 5 minutes of ecosiering and just seeing like, oh right, okay, this was clearly just marked by accident. This is YouTube needs to do something about this. I'm gonna go and shout at them instead.
And beyond even that, every generation since ever has had new slang they invent. So no one is in any position to be like, that's stupid. What's that mean? That doesn't even mean that's stupid. Just like, no, give over. But with that said, just because you're not doing anything of like educational or creative, like, quote, value,
Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with getting back from a day of a bunch of crap at school that you don't really care about or are particularly interested in, and just needing to just not speak to people and just sit quietly and like play a game for like a couple hours. But I feel like the vibe on that is just like, bloody teenagers, no one to spend time with them. Like, just give people time to breathe sometimes, please. This isn't even something that impacted me. My whole family didn't let me alone in that regard. I feel like it's a vibe I get from the world. I don't know. I used to survive before XYZ thing. Like, yeah, okay. Parents and people who do have restrictions set up, sometimes they just seem so smug about it. And then other people who like chime in and they're like, I didn't even have internet until I was 97. And it's like, okay. Okay, some people didn't have a microwave until they were 45. Does that mean screw you if you would like to have one and partake in the convenience and benefits of it before that point? Just because you walked to school uphill both ways doesn't mean I should have to, type thing. People survived before books. Does that mean we should just not bother ever inventing anything? Is your only goal in life to continue to survive? Like, do you not want to have interests or hobbies? Or do you only want people to have interests in and hobbies that align with your interests and hobbies, and anything other than that makes you part of a problem? And that's not to say that some cool kid type teenagers are menaces. But they're not all menaces, but because of them, everyone perceives them as such, and that's a whole other issue. But only as much menaces as people who see you use a phone briefly in public or on a bus or something, and then start having to go at you and making sarcastic, passive-aggressive remarks. You don't know what I'm doing. I could be diabetic. I could be checking insulin levels. I could be writing a book. I could be doing sod off. Don't buy a house near a school if you're going to complain about teenagers being nearby. It's like buying a house next to an airport and then complaining about the noise. People do that too. Which is, in turn, also not to say that people of any age can't be menaces, and the type of person to seemingly find grounds for mockery in just existing as a person. That's not even relevant. I'm really going off even more here, but it's like when older people get really worked up over getting disrespected, whatever that inexplicable abstract concept means to the particular person in question on that day, by someone a lot younger than them, like a teenager, and they're all always, respect your elders, which, like, I'm not blindly deferring to someone just because they've existed for a bit longer than me, even if it doesn't matter how terrible a person is, apparently, if they're a day older than you, that overrides everything. Fuck off. Second of all, if they're so young and worthless, like you're saying that they are, you're getting really deeply offended being sarcastically replied to by someone who's apparently so worthless to you and whose opinion matters so little. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't know, like sometimes you'll see someone get seriously pissed off by a teenager saying they're a bad person or whatever, and they start saying, oh, how dare you, you get back when you've had some real life experience. And it's like, if they're that meaningless to you, just ignore them. Why are you letting them get to you so much if they're so meaningless and worthless to the world? I don't know what I'm saying anymore. So yeah, I get annoyed when I see like blanket statements like technology is ruining the youth, because it's like, no, technology made my youth. It made me the person that I am with the interest that I am and the stuff that I love researching and using and talking about. So it just feels like, how would you feel if someone was like, I don't know, what are old people into? How would you feel if Michael Portillo train documentaries were suddenly deemed to be the downfall of society and everyone was complaining about you for liking them? Just because some people had watched them and taken them as inspiration to drive trains into cat cafes, and despite you playing literally no part in that whatsoever, you're still assumed to be part of this problem just because of your association to liking the initial thing. Because it came out that Michael Portillo had been specifically, purposefully designing his train programs to convince people to drive trains into cat cafes. The solution to that would not be to just try and stop people from watching Michael Portillo train documentaries and complain about people who like Michael Portillo train documentaries regardless of whether they are using them as motivation to drive trains into cat cafes. The solution would be to stop Michael Portillo. I know, in terms of this allegory, the average person can't do anything to stop Michael Portillo, but what you can do is have a real, like, sensible person-to-person conversation with the person in your family who keeps watching Michael Portillo train documentaries, explain to them that Michael Portillo is specifically designing them to try and get you to drive a train into a cat cafe, and make sure they're aware of that. Learn the ways he uses to convince you to drive trains into cat cafes, so you can learn to avoid them and only watch the programs for their educational and entertainment value. Why am I still running with this allegory? But if you were, in government, your solution isn't to impose Michael Portillo bans. The solution is to try and do something about the fact Michael Portillo has the freedom to convince people to drive trains into cat cafes. You get what I'm trying to say? Maybe? Hope? Probably not.
That'd feel terrible, but it's like, no. The use of the technology itself is not the problem. The use of it is the problem. The fact that everything is designed to be as addictive as possible, that is the problem. The use of the thing is what matters, and for some reason people... But then, because of the fact that every social media is designed to be as addictive as possible, that then causes people to become addicted to those things, which then means like, yep, no, okay, now we're screwed. Everything, I don't know. What am I even saying? That is a problem. That is not an inherent problem
of use of technology.
We don't need to just go back to inscribing stuff on wax. We just need to stop allowing 1-year-olds to watch 4-second videos all day.
And go after the actual problem here.
Thereby, not constantly villainising youths who are in the same position that I and many others were, of just being like interested in how stuff works, while constantly being told, no, technology is ruining your youth, go outside. I don't want to bloody go outside, it's cold. There's people out there, I want to talk to people. I want to reconfigure my network drive. Piss off. People have different interests. Extroverts need to stop believing sincerely that their version of fun is the only one that counts. I've said that before. And seeming to be incapable of perceiving the possibility that, like, they seem to think that, now, if you tried this, you'd realise that I'm actually right. But no! Go away! You go and do that if you love it so much. Let me sit here and I don't know, research Firewire or something. I don't know. I realise it's incredibly rich of me to say that 11-year-olds shouldn't be watching TikTok because of the lengths that I went to circumvent parental controls to watch YouTube, but I was watching like 10 to 15 minute long videos, not like 10 to 30 second clips of stuff constantly changing. Like, it isn't the same even within that, even within consuming online content, even within the broad spectrum of social media. Like, all I use social media for is to speak to people that I know, see what people are doing, and just be like, oh, that's cool, they're doing that. That's cool, see what they've been doing. And look at a funny cat video a day. My Instagram use time is like 13 minutes a day average. Like, it's not even that social media itself is inherently the problem, it's misuse and how easy it is because of how addictive the companies specifically try and make it to reel you in and then get you stuck. Reel you in, that was an accidental pun. And it's like, again, I think, am I really allowed to complain about youths watching a lot of TikTok after how much I hated people complaining about YouTube? But again, I was watching long-form content. It wasn't the content itself. It wasn't the form it's in that was the problem. It was the content itself that was potentially the horrifying problem. The form itself was the same form as TV in a lot of ways, like the same kind of length and everything. Whereas this is different. This is very short, and there is actually some kind of, connection to attention span. And I know that it being short doesn't inherently, like, you can still have like very fast-paced, constantly cutting content that is long form technically, but still has a similar effect. But I don't know, just I feel like there actually is something here, unlike the pearl clutching from when I was a youth of like, oh no, instead of watching a 15-minute TV program, little Timmy wants to watch a 15-minute, I don't know, Minecraft video. It's the end of days, the youths are out of control! This is a whole other topic. I'm so completely far off the beaten track of what I'm supposed to be talking about here. It's going dark. I've been doing this for so long. Let's carry on. I recorded this. It's going to get a bit brighter in a second. I recorded this a bit later. See you in the darkness again later. And finally, for this tangent, the last thing I'll say, I promise this is the last thing I'll say on this obscene tangent. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the recent online increase and discourse around the appreciation of specifically Fruta Guerrero, and referring to it as Fruta Guerrero and related things, that increase was kicked off by Undefined, wasn't it? Genuinely, am I wrong about this? Because as far as I can see, her video about it in December 2021 was basically the start of this, but for some reason, everyone else who talks about it on here just seems to be like allergic to giving her the credit that's due for introducing this to the world. Okay, maybe I am wrong, although there is one tiny little bump at the start of 2022, so I'm taking it. Unless a video only really hit the algorithm a year later, which is technically possible. Hold on. What if we look at... Where's that? Yeah, what if we look at comments? Can I get a line graph? Aha! Ah! Case closed, pick up my calendar, find.
Look at this graph!
Correlation is causation.
Okay, let's move on. I've considered making that whole rant a video unto itself in the past, but whatever. It's fine, it can go in here. Right. Before we get to the bonus Linux distros, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone, the worst operating system I have ever had the displeasure of using, so much so I'm going to put it a line down from the others. macOS 10.15 Catalina. This pile of was the most unstable, unreliable, buggy excuse for an operating system I have ever had the displeasure of spending time with.
Horrible.
Oh, nasty, unreliable, uncomfortable.
And as I said, I spent my formative years in Vista. macOS had never fully crashed on me before. Neither had Windows, to be fair. I've only had like single-digit numbers of blue screens of death in my life. At this point, macOS none. But Crapalooza would just fully crash on me. The whole OS just crash on me multiple times a day. It was so bloated that editing video in Final Cut, Apple's own program, was unbearable. But also, on the same family computer as well, my dad was completely fine with it. It was fine for him, and then I used that same computer on the same, the exact same version, the same day, and it'd be an abysmal mess. And I'd be like, why doesn't it just hate me? Even if I wasn't doing something like video editing, which was more intense, it's just. What is going on here? It felt like I was trying to edit on a Pentium or something, on the exact same hardware that was just completely fine in Mojave prior. And the fact that it was the one immediately after Mojave made it all the more noticeable how terrible it was. If it had come out after another one that wasn't very good, it would just be like, oh, this is a bit worse. No, Catalina came out straight after Mojave, so it went from being the best operating system I've ever used to quite literally the worst I've ever used. Speaking of video editing, sometimes, doing it in Catalina, Final Cut would just take a random few seconds of a project, not even like one, like if you've got your timeline of clips, not even just one clip, but just like a random selection of seconds bridging over multiple clips, and it would just stop rendering them properly. Like, you try and export the project, and it would just fail. It would just fail at that point, and you'd have to scrub through what it did export to figure out, right, where did this break, and then try and figure out which section it was just dying on, and replace it with, like, re-import the clips or whatever. Even if that was a bit that I'd edited months prior and it had been background rendered ages prior, no, just that bit, those few seconds. Nah. Also, it dropped 32-bit app support in the name of stability, which also meant, this didn't impact me, but it impacted some people. If you had your photos in iPhoto, which, by the way, was way better than the Photos app that replaced it.
And also one of the only ways to pull photos from an iPhone 2G.
It is a separate app, you can still use the old one. But because the old one is 32-bit, if you had your photos in iPhoto, rather than just in folders or in the Photos app, you'd have to, because as far as I saw it, this wasn't broadcast to the world prior to the fact anywhere near enough, if at all. But if all your photos were in there, and it updated and lost support because it's 32-bit, you were just stuck. The only way to get your photos out would be to go, presumably, into the local photos folder, show package contents on the, like, iPhoto library, and manually get them out of there. They didn't tell it, as far as I can see, they didn't tell anyone ahead of time that they were going to have to do that. So, or even after the fact. So, to like, the average Joe who wouldn't think to try and do that, or who wouldn't think to look it up and see if you get it, it would just be like, you've lost all your photos. For all intents and purposes, for that kind of user. Especially if they go if they try and open iPhoto and it's like, nah, sorry, 32-bit. They might just delete it and then it is gone. Like, at the absolute least, they should have been very vocal about the fact that iPhoto was going to lose support. I know the Photos app had been around for ages at this point. You know, you can't be just doing that. You've got to tell people about this stuff. And it was also the start of macOS being absurdly paranoid, as I mentioned before. Vista-style UAC constantly needing permissions. I'm sure it needed you to authenticate with the administrator password more often than it used to, which at the time I didn't always have the ability to do. Like nowadays, it's just like, I would just like, yeah, whatever, slightly annoying, whatever. But this was back when I was still dealing with parental controls, because I was still a teenager. I was still like 14 or something. So I would have to, every time it did, I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna go and find my parents. Like, can you put this in? Oh, what are you doing? Oh, and I've got to explain the whole. I'm not trying to go on the dark web and look at a picture of a skeleton. I'm just trying to move a program from there into there. I'm just trying to make subfolders or something. Oh my goodness. I'm just trying to change one small setting. And it was the start of the evolution into the grant screen capture permissions to a program for a week. But after that, we'll bother you again. Like, just let me set my permissions preferences and how I want them, and just leave them be. If I give OBS screen capture permissions, just leave it with the screen capture permissions, or at the very least, only prompt me about it again if it's updated or modified in some way. Don't just do it for a week, and then even if nothing has changed.
Nice one, OBS.
Why do Apple think their users are morons? I know, like, the iPad, by Tim Apple's own admission, is designed so that toddlers and old people can use them relatively easily, but that's fair enough. That's like the main target audience of that product. Like, this is like iCloud Photos rant. I talk about this a bit there. And it also totally reset notification settings, which, I mean, isn't inherently like if you were viewing every OS on its own merit, that's not like the worst thing in the world, because if you were just like, I'm going to install that one, that wouldn't be something that'd be a particular problem. But I already had everything set up in Mojave, and it takes forever to set them up, because it doesn't just, everything's not in the list by default. You have to wait for a program to give you a notification, to then be able to go into system preferences and tell it, no, I don't want this program giving me notifications, or at least change which notifications it can give you. And for some reason, just everything seemingly wants to give you notifications. Just you think that you've done and everything's fine, and then it's just like, bling, which is particularly annoying if you want to have a backup image that you can then restore back from later, because then you'll be thinking, oh, that's nice, all done and sorted, and then you'll be using some other program, and it'll hit you with some program you've not used for ages or not used since the update, and it'll be like, bling, we're giving you notifications. Why? What? This doesn't need to give you notifications. And even if it, and now that I've done that, I've got to either do another image backup, or I've got to make a note. If you're reinstalling this thing, I'll want to give you a notification. Like, other specific Catalina issues. The quick look. On macOS, you can press the spacebar to get a quick preview of a file, and if you do that on a video, you can also trim it a bit in there. But in Catalina, this started just the trimming timeline UI, just started zooming in and out whenever it felt like it. Sometimes it would just never load on network drives, it just load forever. And sometimes the window would get stuck open until you restarted the entire machine. And then if you trimmed a clip with it, it then couldn't replace the original clip, but it doesn't tell you this until after you've clicked overwrite the previous file and then sat through it saving, and only then is it like, oh no, I couldn't do that, and then you're just out of luck. As I said in the description of that Tech Opinions video from 6 years ago, to try and edit even that, I sat down to edit it, and within 3 minutes the entire of Catalina had crashed and restarted, then Final Cut had crashed, then failed 2 exports, then the Final Cut Pro quit unexpectedly error message froze up in and of itself, and I had to restart the whole machine. Only it couldn't even cope with that, and I had to hard restart it with just holding the power button, but there we go. Catalina was just a horrible, horrible experience. Also, universal copy-paste just didn't work. It just stopped working at this kind of time. And I don't know if this was a Catalina-specific issue, but sometimes I was using iCloud reminders quite a bit, and sometimes I'd delete one, and I'd 1 or 2 or possibly 3 old ones would just respawn at the bottom of the list that I'd deleted days or weeks prior. In this same era, I can't remember which iOS version it would have been, but if I accidentally drew a line on a screenshot while I was cropping it in just like the quick edit thing after you've taken a screenshot and tapped on it to like edit it quickly, if I'd cropped it a bit and then drawn a line by mistake, if I pressed undo, it would undo all of the cropping a step at a time and only then undo the line, even though that's not the order that I made the edits in. Also, while I'm thinking about it, to be fair, this is also true of Mojave, but I didn't think about it because I'm so used to the workaround. But macOS Mail, if you just close it but without fully quitting it, so it just stays open in the background, sometimes it'll just pop back up and present itself front and center, which is mildly irritating at the best of times. But if you're running a full screen Windows VM, which as I've discussed I often am, it will force itself into half of the full screen and shove the Windows window into the other half of the screen and just send your desktop icons scattering into a completely different organization and resize your windows and stuff, which is just so infuriating. So I now just do hide I just right-click hide on mail instead of closing it, and that's fine. But it's still, worth mentioning. Second nature now, but, it'd still be better to not have to. On a similar note, in Android Android's video trimming feature has much less wide hit detection. When I was trimming a video in Photos and iOS in this era, I'd often try and tap on the timeline to move the playback bar thing towards the end of the clip so I could check I'd trimmed the end of the video correctly, but it would always just move the end of the trim back to where I tapped, even if where I tapped was nowhere near where it was before. And this wasn't just it moving the start or end of the trim to wherever you tap, because if you go in the middle, it would move the playback bar thing. macOS Catalina is atrocious. I'm done. Hi, and welcome back to the darkness. I am going to rank Linux distros, but first, I'm going to talk about Chrome OS, so I don't have to stave off the wrath of the Linux fans a little longer. Chrome OS is terrible. Anyway, as I was saying, no, to give it a fair test, I have tried it out. I have used Chrome OS. I'm not just blindly hating from third party looking at it from the outside. I have used Chrome OS. It's terrible.
I was just right about everything.
All the mobile optimized apps don't translate well into a desktop environment. There's barely any settings to work with, and it's just not a good time. Someone commented on my ancient Tech Opinions video comparatively recently, pointing out that a positive of Chromebooks is that they have good battery life, which is true. But, an electric toothbrush probably has better battery life than an average laptop. It's of no benefit if you I can't do anything with it, so it doesn't matter how long the battery lasts. Fair enough, if all you're doing is basic word processing, and there are technically use cases, I will concede. Everything. I will even concede that some people may like Chromebooks. You're wrong, but not really kidding. I feel bad for the thousands of students who are forced to use this as their first computing experience. What would mine have been? Oh, it might have been Vista. Still better than this. I love the idea of doing work digitally. You can save it all. You can keep it forever. I wish, if I could have a digital archive of everything I'd ever written for school, right back through to reception, it'd be great. I could go and read the what I did at the weekend stories and be like, oh, I remember that. That was that time or whatever. But Chrome OS really isn't the way to do it. And like I've said, without the influence of tech in my youth, I wouldn't be the person that I am today, which formed some great times and led to me taking so many photos, with the added benefit of metadata. People who love printed photos so much, I can see exactly when and where stuff was taken. I don't have to write it on the back, and then if my house burns down, I don't lose it all because I've got multiple copies of it. Have physical photos if you want, but as a secondary copy, please. And videos, and creating stuff. And I can still look back on today, which is how I remember my own life so absurdly well, right back to 2011. And even then, a bit before that, to 2007 even. I love tech for that, and I get a pang of visceral frustration, like I said before, when people say stuff like, oh, tech is bad, no kid should ever be able to use it at all, or if you should only get to use it for 6 minutes a week or whatever. Things in that general area, because how would you feel if people were saying that about whatever hobby or fascination you had as a youth? What if bike riding is technically bad for you? Bike riding's bad for you if you ride it off a cliff. Should we ban all bike riding? No, we just teach people, don't ride your bike off a cliff. It's a bit of a simplified example, but it's the same kind of principle. You need to teach the youth kind of media literacy, how to not get hooked into this stuff. I'm going off on that tangent again. And that can vary massively from individual to individual. My parents told me, don't speak to strangers on the internet. So I was like, yeah. So I didn't speak to strangers on the internet and give them all our personal information and the address. I know this YouTube channel is technically talking to strangers, but not in that way.
Even when I went to the trouble of circumventing restrictions, I just sincerely never had any intention of doing that.
But then also technically, you don't know what your child is actually thinking. They could pretend to be, cooperative, but then not be.
What I will definitively say is that I don't know if this is just me interpreting it wrong, but the smugness with which some people who have some kind of restrictions set up along these lines in place, just get a vibe of smugness sometimes, and that is not helping anyone at all. You're acting like a cartoon villain. Get off your weird power trip. A, all that's going to do is motivate rebellion, and B, it's just incredibly obnoxious. Just stop doing that. Just talk to them and anyone else about it like a normal functioning person.
And then there's the whole issue of if they don't have such and such a thing, will they then be bullied or laughed at school? And it's
I see people who just say, I don't care. And it's like, what do you mean you don't care? You don't care if your child is being bullied. That's nice. I understand the sentiment, and I don't have any personal experience of that, apart from maybe 1 or 2 times where I was slightly laughed at for the frustration I was going through of having to deal with not being allowed on YouTube and figuring out the workarounds, which even at the time I was like, what do you mean? This isn't my fault. But fortunately I didn't have to deal with that much, but that is absolutely a thing. Maybe I just had nice friends, because when I had the Nokia as well, I've seen people say before that would be grounds for mockery, but I suppose maybe I'm just in the right bit of generation where people were just like, oh, that's cool, and then we just moved on. But I'm not denying that is potentially an issue, and it just seems completely needlessly cruel and adding to the borderline smug factor for people to just be like, I don't care. Real nice.
I appreciate that it's a minefield, and I appreciate the fact that it's not an easy thing to figure out. I will freely, like, I do admit, I do agree. I'm not claiming, like, oh, just do this and then everything will be solved. But, like, I know that that's not always the case. People can be, like, youths can be rebellious or just ignore stuff. Like, it depends entirely on who you are from person to person, maturity level. It's really hard to just say, like, blanket, this age, this should happen, this age, this should happen. And depends entirely on whether the person in question is actually learning stuff or just watching, like, mindless brain rot.
But then to a certain extent, like, we and people before us were told, too much TV rots your brain. Before that, I think people were saying it about reading and every single other thing, because people just love to complain about whatever people younger than them liked that didn't exist when they were young for some reason, in spite of the fact that they had it done to them and know how annoying it was, but still it goes on. But then at this point, there's then actually some truth to it because of how short everything is and all that sort of thing.
And having reasonable parental controls and all that stuff. I'm going off on that tangent again. But if there's anything, if there's any tech that you don't want your child to have to suffer through, it's Chrome OS. Still runs better than macOS Catalina. I'm genuinely going to rank it slightly above macOS Catalina because at least it runs. It can go above iOS 7 because at least it hasn't caused the downfall of society. Okay, alright, moment you've been waiting for. I'm going to switch some lights on. I've not planned this part. I'm just going to do this off the top of my head. Okay, Linux distros. I'm braced for the comments from the hardcore Linux chads who I was trying to protect myself from by not including these. Apart from Android, I suppose, technically, as someone on Twitter pointed out that I'd forgotten about. That's based on Linux. And I guess Chrome OS now, but I feel like hardcore Linux chads would feel exactly the same way I do about Chrome OS, so there's no worries there. But I'm going for it now. I don't think Clonezilla counts. Now, I should preface, I know some people, especially after the SpongeBob Moves In videos, feel like I'm like a tech wizard. I'm not. I get it though. I understand. Like if this is kind of average technical knowledge, I'm like maybe there, but then someone like Matt KC is like there, but from there they look the same. So I understand that perception, but I assure you I'm not a wizard. So that limits me a bit in my Linux ability, especially I have no hope in Arch. The 3 that I have used enough to form a reasonable opinion are Tails, Ubuntu, and Mint in that order. When I was originally figuring out this ranking of everything, I at some points trying to think, what would I rather be stuck with forever? But I don't know, that's so different. The use case is so different. Like, Tails is brilliant, but for specific purposes. And Mint and Ubuntu are great, but like they all have their Linux limitations, compatibility issues, stuff like that. Here we go. I'm going to rank them together. Ubuntu, Mint, and Tails. Here we go.